Hey everybody, Drew here with the Star Citizen update and commentary, where I share my thoughts and perspectives on aspects of the massively ambitious crowd-funded sci-fi universe. So last week there was a lot of excitement in the community when Cameron, the YouTuber that does focus testing of ships, components, shields, weapons, etc., had a post on Spectrum asking about the dynamic room system, which CIG had talked about 4 years or so ago, and been a few mentions here and there, but we haven't really heard very much about it recently. So the community was shocked when Chris Roberts himself came out at 2 a.m. his time in California and wrote a long novel of an answer to Cameron and really elaborated on the dynamic room system. And what was shocking here is that we haven't really heard very much from Chris Roberts directly in almost 2 years. He's really pulled back a lot from direct interaction with the community on Spectrum or really doing very many of the weekly programs that CIG puts out. We've seen him on the quarterly Pillar Talks, but they've gotten more and more condensed where we don't really get what we used to in the past, where he would really kind of monologue on his big picture view of what some of these systems were going to be, and nobody else in the company can give us that perspective the way that he has. He starts off by saying that the room system has been in the game for quite a while and fully works, including equalization of gases and atmosphere between room volumes, including dissipation into the global room, aka open space and vacuum. And when you suffocate for lack of oxygen, it's because you're in a room with not enough oxygen. And I think most of us have experienced that sometimes in a hab or in one of the stores or in some random place inside of one of the spaceships. And the room system is basically how the game describes volumes of gas, their pressure, density, and temperature so that a planet has a room, its atmosphere, a ship has rooms, the various compartments between the bulkheads, and even the coil in Squadron 42 has its volume described by a room. So a room is any particular atmospheric condition, be it a moon, a planet, a store, or a gas cloud in space. What was interesting here was that they not only use it for the player status system, where you're breathing oxygen, but they also use it for atmospheric flight. So the room system contains all the information in terms of density and composition of the atmosphere in terms of gases that Flight Model uses to calculate drag and lift. And it's also used to create the weather systems. It says some of the current weather ground effects are partly influenced by the room's temperature, so, and again, room by the planetary atmosphere of a particular temperate zone. You know, like the really cold areas of Microtech or some of the warmer areas are going to have different types of weather patterns. So the room's temperature, density, and even the composition of the gases in the atmosphere are going to affect your flight and the weather. So he then goes on to describe the difference between mutable and immutable room atmosphere conditions, where mutable means that the room has a finite amount of density and pressure, the gases which can pass to another room if it's connected, and if there's a difference in pressure. So if you're vented to the vacuum of space, all of your atmosphere is going to go out, and that can happen from one room to another in a ship. If you have a large ship, if one room ends up being vented to space by combat damage, then you are going to want to seal your bulkheads so that you don't lose all the atmosphere in your ship. Immutable rooms are areas like planets and vacuum of space where it's not going to change. Now, a juicy bit here is that he was saying where they first set up the rooms of the vehicles, they didn't have the life support component in and its related vents implemented. So they had no way to supply more oxygen to the rooms that had lost it. So the designers set up the ship rooms to be immutable with an infinite supply of oxygen as a temporary solution. And eventually they'll be set up as mutable where it'll be variable. So if you happen to suffocate in one of the rooms of your ships, it was accidentally set to immutable, mutable, not immutable, and it lost its atmosphere. And they had the initial implementation of life support components and their connected vents working internally, but rolling it out for all the ships is going to take a while, and as they need to literally plumb the ships with a set of extra components. So this was pretty exciting to learn that they're pretty far along with this, and they have talked about that in the past where vents would supply breathable atmosphere into each of the rooms of the ships. And if you had more people in that room consuming more oxygen than was being put out, then it would lose its breathable atmosphere. and that ships overall would have a maximum capacity of crew and passengers of the life support systems. So if you had too many people on a ship, then it would overload the systems, and it would not be a good thing. He also said that they have updates to the pipe system that shares resources like power, heat, fuel, and atmosphere between the components. So it's really a matter of scheduling when they do passes on the huge number of ships to set them up for new systems that are waiting. So it's more efficient for them to update multiple things at once when they crack open a ship to update it. Hence, some of the functionality we've been waiting in the wings hasn't been rolled out just yet because they have over 80 flyable ships. And every one of these ships needs to have a huge amount of work done to all the components, the piping system, the new more interactive cockpits. It's a huge amount of work on every single ship. So I'm curious when they're planning on doing that. I guess they may want to kind of complete the work on the tech, so that when they go through, everything's ready to put in all at once by the technical team. So then he gets to the really good part of the post where he talks about that there's a lot of very cool systemic gameplay that they've been working on to finish off in the background for ships that once it's all together will create a spaceship simulation like no other. And he gives an example that factors in the new physical damage, the fire, room, pipe, and player status systems. So I'll read through this and try to condense some of it. A ballistic round passes through the ship's shield, which scrubs off some of its kinetic energy, but not enough, as the round's velocity was high, as was its mass, as it was an armor-piercing round. It manages to penetrate the armor and strikes an internal component, say a power relay node, something else we're working on as part of the pipe system refactor. Now that's a really interesting data point there, the power relay nodes that we'll talk about a little bit later. The power node takes damage, giving it a chance to misfire while in use. A few minutes later, the node does misfire, blowing its fuse and resulting in it catching fire. The crew of the ship doesn't realize the fire is broken out in one of its side corridors as they're busily concentrating on fighting the ships attacking them. The fire starts to spread along flammable surfaces, and as the fire starts to engulf other components, they also catch fire. Now, this really gives us some of the background on what we've been seeing in Inside Star Citizen and Star Citizen Live over the past month or so, where they've been showing the fire special effects that they've been developing. And a lot of us kind of wondered, okay, well, yeah, fire bad, fire in spaceships really bad, but how is it going to really be a part of the damage control combat gameplay? And this really starts to kind of flesh out that. The engineer on the bridge of the ship sees his console flash red, giving him a warning that several components have failed, and looking at his ship's schematic, he sees a fire has broken out below deck. So these engineering schematic screens sound like they're going to have a lot of monitoring, and that's really exciting. So the engineer decides to seal the bulkhead doors on the corridor to contain the fire, but the doors have no power as a power node is out. He calms one of the crewmates to leave his turret, grab an extinguisher, and put out the blaze, which is slowly creeping towards the power plant room. Fire reaching a ship's power plant or its ammo stores are the two surefire ways for your ship to go boom. With the physical damage system, ships will no longer just explode when their hit points reach zero. They'll explode because something inside them went critical and exploded due to damage or heat, which then damages everything else. That's one of the really big changes that everybody's been looking forward to. So the ships no longer have the hit point to pop, where once they take damage, they just explode, and you don't have any chance of survival or escape or damage control. When the crew member gets to the corridor where the fire is broken out, it has already consumed a huge amount of oxygen in that room, in the corridor, and has released noxious gases. So the crew member can't breathe, quickly retreats to put on a fire-resistant suit and helmet. The engineer in desperation manages to reroute power away from the destroyed node through a secondary node, restoring power to enough of the bulkhead doors to allow him to contain the fire. Noticing that there is an external airlock in the sealed-off area, he opens the airlock, venting the oxygen in the sealed-off corridors and rooms to the vacuum of space, depriving the fire of its ability to burn, and putting most of it out. By this time, the crew member is suitably dressed and can extinguish the fire that made it past the bulkhead before it can grow again. The engineer then reseals the airlock, allows the life support system to replenish the air in the vented part of the ship. Once done, the engineer opens up the bulkhead door, allowing the crew member in with a replacement fuse for the power node, restoring power to that section of the ship, then returns to his turret. It's been a close call, but the ship is still alive and in the fight. Now, this whole scenario is so exciting because it really brings to mind those great sci-fi movies where the Millennium Falcon or the Star Trek Enterprise was in battle, taking damage, and you're having to run around and pull off bulkheads and put out fires and rewire power supplies. Scotty was in there, like, I'm giving her all she's got, Captain, and just like really creates a whole nother level of interior gameplay that's not just shooty shooty pew pew, and gives something for the whole crew to be a lot more involved in. You have a real engineering section, especially on the larger multi-crew ships. On a smaller ship, I, this could be a really major problem. It's going to take you out of the fight. You're going to lose systems. You're going to have to actually, and if you get out of the battle, you're going to have to get out in your EVA suit and work on the components that are going to have exterior access. So then he wraps up by saying, what I describe will be possible once we have finished and deployed the systems we're working on. I know it can be frustrating to wait for all this functionality to be online, but I promise you everyone is working as hard and as smartly as possible to get there. We're just going for a higher level of systemic gameplay versus scripted than most, if not all, games, and to architect all of this so it works in multiplayer at scale is no small feat. I am very invested in making Star Citizen's gameplay as systemic as possible, as I think this will open up so many possibilities of emergent and immersive gameplay. The downside of this approach is that it takes longer to see results as opposed to scripting actions, so you have to build the fundamental systems first and have them interact with each other before the full extent of the gameplay becomes apparent. For the long term, and for the people's ability to lose themselves in the universe of Star Citizen for many years to come, it is the approach that will have the best results. So this whole post was just really refreshing and exciting to hear Chris talking about his vision for the future gameplay and the future universe, and how much depth and detail there's going to be. Right now, we already have the most beautiful and immersive one-to-one scale spaceships that anybody's ever tried to create, and there's so many of them. And from talking to a lot of the other longtime backers, some of the original Kickstarter backers, that it's been a long time for them. They've been waiting 8 years, and we've got years ahead of us. But we see the progress that they're making. And when he comes out and reminds everybody of what's coming and the bigger picture and how much more we're going to have, I think it reinvigorated a lot of people and renewed the faith that Chris is in charge. He's working his ass off. I mean, he did this at 2 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I've met Chris Roberts at CitizenCon, and he is just so passionate. And the way he is on stage and in the shows, I mean, this is his life. This is his life's work. He doesn't need the money. And he made tons of money off of Wing Commander. He made tons of money off of producing big Hollywood hits. And this is the dream that he's had. And it's resonated with all of us space nerds that have been dreaming of escaping into a completely immersive, as realistic as possible simulation of Star Wars or Star Trek or The Expanse or Firefly that lets us live inside of our spaceships and get in and just head out into the black and just really feel real like nothing else ever has. So that was a lot to digest just in his first post. There was another follow-up post after Cameron came back and wasn't really happy with that grade of information, which really kind of triggered me, but we're not going to go too much into that. So I'm going to cut this one short, and I'm going to do the second half of his other post in another video, because this is my first attempt to really have a good commentary video. I'm going to be doing a lot more of these in the future because I've been following the project for 5 years daily with a microscope, and this is my life. And I want to share my perspective because, as a high level long term backer, I am very positive about where we are, the development pace, and where we're going, and the vision that Chris has and the team that he's put together to build it. So if you like this content and want more of it, please like and subscribe. In the links below, there's also a link to my Patreon, and we will see you around the verse.